What if I told you that our understanding of the human mind, of what we consider normal, has been fundamentally shaped by a few children? Children who, for centuries, were misunderstood, misdiagnosed, or simply overlooked. I am Jewel, and this is the Ananya Child Development Centre podcast. Today, we are embarking on a 4-part journey, a journey to uncover the hidden history of autism. Imagine a world where certain behaviours, certain ways of interacting were simply labelled as madness, where children who struggled to connect, who saw the world through a different lens, were often hidden away, their potential lost forever. This was the world before autism had a name, before it was even recognized as a distinct condition. To guide us on this journey, I am thrilled to welcome Madhavi Adimulam, founder of Ananya Child Development Centre and a leading expert in child development.
Thank you, Jules. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, let's rewind the clock. Let's go back centuries, even before the 20th century. How were children we might now recognize as autistic perceived and treated in those times?
It's a history that's often shrouded in darkness. There was no framework, no medical understanding to explain their behaviors. These children, and the likely many adults as well, were often seen through the lens of superstition, religious beliefs, or simply dismissed as different or difficult. In some cultures, they might have been labeled as changelings. These children believed to have been secretly replaced by fairies. In others, they might have been considered possessed by spirits or afflicted by a curse.
So, essentially, their differences were attributed to supernatural forces, not to any underlying neurological condition.
Exactly. And the consequences could be severe. Some were hidden away by their families, kept out of sight, sometimes out of shame or fear. Others ended up in institutions, asylums, or workhouses, where they were often subjected to neglect or even abuse. There was no concept of support or intervention as we understand it today. It was a very bleak picture for many. In certain instances, children were even thought to be blessed. This did not, however, mean that they necessarily received any better treatment.
It's hard to imagine such a lack of understanding. Were there any attempts to document or study these individuals, even without the labels we use today?
If we sift through historical accounts, medical texts, and even folklore, we can find glimpses. These are descriptions of individuals who exhibit traits that we might now associate with autism. For example, there's the fascinating case of Wild Peter, a boy found living in the forests of Germany in the 18th century. He was nonverbal, had unusual sensory sensitivities, and engaged in repetitive behaviors. He was considered a curiosity, a feral child. But some modern analysis suggests that he might have had autism.
Even without the term autism, there were individuals throughout history who displayed similar characteristics.
Precisely. We had fascinating accounts in religious texts, personal diaries, literature. Some scholars believe certain historical figures, scientists and artists might have been on the spectrum. But remember, we are talking about a different era. We have no conclusive evidence and we must avoid retrospective diagnosis. What these accounts tell us is that autism has likely always been part of human experience. People just didn't have the words for it. Human diversity has always existed. Accepting this helps create a better world for all.
It's like looking at old photographs, seeing familiar faces, but not knowing their names or stories. So, how did this begin to change? When did the medical world start to take notice?
The shift began in the late 19th and early 20th centuries as psychiatry developed. But the focus was mainly on adults with severe mental illnesses. Children's mental health, that was barely considered.
So, child psychiatry was essentially a blank slate?
Very much so. There were some early pioneers studying children's emotional and behavioral patterns, but it was a new field. Then, in 1911, we have a key moment. Eugen Bleuler.
The name that keeps coming up in the context of autism.
Yes, Eugen Bleuler, a prominent Swiss psychiatrist, coined the term autism. He derived it from the Greek word autos, meaning self.
So, he wasn't describing the autism we know today.
Not at all. For Bleuler, autism meant withdrawal from reality, detachment from social relationships, turning inwards towards one's thoughts. He saw these patients as living in their own private worlds, disconnected from the external world, a core symptom of schizophrenia, a way of coping with a fragmented and overwhelming inner experience.
So, let me get this straight. Autism was first seen as just a symptom, not even its own condition.
Precisely, for decades, autism was viewed as just a part of schizophrenia. This had devastating consequences. Many children were wrongly diagnosed. They carried the heavy stigma of childhood schizophrenia. Most ended up institutionalized.
It's like they had the right puzzle pieces, but were trying to fit it into the wrong puzzle.
Exactly. It shows how scientific understanding evolves over time. But change was coming through one remarkable individual.
Leo Kanner.
Yes, Leo Kanner. But to truly understand his breakthrough, we need to know his story. Picture this: 1894, Klekoto, a small town in Austria-Hungary, now part of Ukraine. A tight-knit Jewish community. This was Kanner's world.
So he came from a completely different world than the one he had later worked in.
Very different. His early life was shaped by deep Jewish traditions, widespread anti-Semitism, the shadow of World War I. When war broke out, he was studying medicine in Berlin. Soon, he found himself serving as an Austrian army medic. These experiences transformed him. Witnessing such suffering firsthand deepened his empathy, heightened his sensitivity to human vulnerability, led him to question everything he thought he knew.
And after the war, he made a decision that would change his life and ultimately the lives of countless others.
Yes, in 1924, he immigrated to the United States. He left behind the turmoil of Europe and sought a new beginning in America. He initially worked as an assistant physician at a state hospital in Yankton, South Dakota. Imagine, Jewel, the contrast between the vibrant intellectual atmosphere in Berlin, where he had studied medicine, and the quiet rural setting of South Dakota.
It must have been an enormous cultural shock, from the heart of European intellectual life to the American Midwest.
Indeed. And it was this unlikely setting Kanner's path towards understanding autism truly began. In 1928, he received an offer that could change his life and lives of countless children and families. A position at the prestigious Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore. He was tasked with developing the first ever child psychiatry service in the United States. It was an extraordinary opportunity, but also an immense challenge.
He was essentially building a new field from the ground up.
Precisely. Child psychiatry as a distinct discipline was practically non-existent at the time. There were no established guidelines, no textbooks, no standardized approaches. Kanner was a pioneer, venturing into uncharted territory. He was creating something entirely new, relying on his intellect, his powers of observation, and his growing understanding of child development.
And it was during this pioneering work that he encountered the 11 children who would change everything. It's like he was assembling a puzzle, piece by piece, without even knowing what the final picture would look like.
Exactly, and that puzzle, that mystery, is what we'll delve into in the next part of our journey.
I'm Jewel, and we are in the midst of a journey through time, tracing the origins of our understanding of autism.